Right, there we are. Daragh, thanks for doing
Yes.
this.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
No worries. All going good, yeah?
Yeah, no tipping away. The sun isn't out here anymore, which is a bit of a dose, but other than that, it's fine. It's all
Yeah.
good.
The weather is like, I don't know what's up with it at the moment. You don't know what's going to happen.
I know, because like
Sun,
the weekend, obviously, the weekend everywhere was roasting, and then last night I was actually freezing in bed, like, so I was like, what is happening? But just Ireland, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. Um, so do you want to just let people know just a bit of background on yourself and kind of what you're doing at the moment and stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, my name's Daragh Fleming. I'm a writer by trade, I suppose, which still always sounds weird to say. Um, I've run a blog called Thoughts Too Big, which is a mental health blog, and I also work with A Lust for Life, who's a mental health charity focusing on young people in Ireland. So at the moment, the big stuff going on is I have a book called Lonely Boy coming out in November 10th with Book Out Publishing, and it's about my own, I suppose, journey with mental health and mental health struggles and kind of the classic tale of trying to figure out who you are by reflecting on all the shit that's happened so far. So that's that's what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I was reading just kind of about on the publishing website. I forget the
Mhm.
name of it now. Um,
That's the one.
yeah, that's the one. Just your kind of, I suppose, bio or whatever on that,
Mhm.
and just your sort of description of Lonely Boy and like where you're coming from and stuff. And I think it was important to kind of put it across that it was, about obviously male mental health and kind of being, I suppose, an advocate for that and getting lads to be more comfortable, maybe speaking out about that kind of stuff. That, I suppose,
Mhm.
was that the kind of big motivation for doing it?
Yeah, like it was definitely a huge factor in it. For me, like writing the book, in itself was kind of cathartic and therapeutic. Like I'd like when I started writing it, it was more of a journal. Like it wasn't with the intent of having it published. But then as things went on and I started realizing more things and linking different dots, I was like, this could actually be quite a helpful tool again for like young men, but not just young men, but young men in particular who like are possibly dealing with all this kind of emotional stuff and dealing with loneliness and not realizing that other men feel that way as well. So as I was writing it then I was like, yeah, this is definitely something, because like I'm not the only person who's gone through this stuff at all, but I think especially in Ireland we men don't really talk about the stuff. So I'm just like, if I can be as open and honest in this book as I can be, and young men read it, then maybe they can be like, oh, we can actually feel like this and it's okay.
Yeah. What do you think the fear is around that? Because I mean now, um, and I've mentioned this before in the podcast where I think that you hear that this kind of the stigma is breaking, or or that it's improved now from say years ago or whatever. But I'm not.
Mhm.
I sometimes I question whether that's true. I think as much as you can have social media and it's easy to kind of put stuff out there, and and you're always told to kind of people are encouraged to kind of speak up and stuff like that. But I
Mhm.
mean, why do you think that fear is still maybe there?
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess like we're we're trying to, you know, quick fix a very rooted problem. Like, so it's been in the kind of the male ethos in society for centuries that we're supposed to be these hard lads who don't speak up, and then it's only in the last 10 years that we're like, no, it's actually okay for you to talk up, and like things don't change overnight. So I think there's still a reluctance to believe it's okay for us to talk up, because I know I've seen on social media and other places where men take that opportunity to talk up and say how they're feeling, and then they get shut down because they're not feeling the correct way about things. And then that just kind of brings us back to, oh, we just won't talk about anything because every time we talk about it we say the wrong thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think we are moving in the right direction, but it's not going to be as quick a fix as we want it to be, because it's so ingrained that it's not just because we're being told it's okay to open up, we're still kind of hesitant, and that's not ideal, but it's realistic. It's not, we're never going to go from never talking about anything to always talking about everything. It's a slow drip change.
Yeah, yeah, definitely something that happens over time. I think um sometimes maybe some forms of social media don't help. I think like lots of things are so like you said, quick fixes there. Lots of things are just like instant, like you see like TikToks now, or
Mm-hmm.
everything. A lot of things are just kind of instant, aren't they? Like um
Yeah.
so there is a kind of maybe a lack of patience as well for people, where we're so used to just getting everything at the kind of touch of a fingertip and stuff.
Yeah,
Maybe that takes
100%.
away from patience for people.
Yeah, because we live in this age of instant gratification where like I want it now,
Mm.
therefore I should have it now. And like, especially like you probably know yourself, dealing with like mental health problems, especially, like it takes a long time to work through stuff. So it doesn't gel well with an idea of instant gratification, like especially mental health stuff, whatever about anything else. But like it takes time. You can't. There's no shortcuts to it. Like you have to just do the work and you have to be patient. And our society at the moment isn't really congruous with patience. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, and but I at the same time as that, I always find it interesting whenever you talk to people about COVID, I'm kind of always of the opinion that COVID kind of helped people in a way to sort of slow down a bit, and kind of, obviously, I think particularly with the first lockdown. I mean, I remember still thinking, talking to people, about the very first lockdown. Oh, it'll be 2 weeks and it'll be gone, like a 2 week holiday, and we'd be out of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And obviously, then that didn't happen. It went on, and then people kind of had more time spent with the family or whatever it was, more time to start new hobbies or that kind of stuff, and then
Mhm.
more time then to kind of start asking questions maybe about why they're doing the career they're doing, or um,
Mhm.
you know, maybe started to shine light on some bad habits they had, or I should maybe do this instead. You know,
Yeah,
did you find that maybe with yourself with COVID, or people you knew?
yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, case in point, the book I'm writing or have written started in the first lockdown, and that was just because I think when you're at home working the whole time, you have a far more free time because you don't have to get up an hour before work, you don't lose an hour after work coming home, so there's a lot more free time. And I think because there wasn't all the hustle and bustle of normal life, like meeting friends in the pub or going to the cinema or whatever it is, like you did have a lot of time to reflect and kind of figure out what exactly it is you wanted, or why maybe you weren't why you weren't happy, or why you weren't satisfied with your life. And like I know a lot of people who've come out of the pandemic and have realized that they don't like the jobs they're working in, and they don't, or they want to go traveling, and they're actually making these changes now because they had the time in lockdown to actually to figure themselves out. And I think that was obviously not, you couldn't predict that, because at the start of the pandemic we were all freaking out, and rightly so, because it was this unknown thing. But it's a kind of strange perk of the pandemic, for want of a better phrase, that like people had time to figure themselves out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always reluctant to kind of talk about it as well, because people think like you're saying COVID's great. Obviously, it wasn't, but
Yeah,
there's, I think it's kind of just trying to find the small good in something like that.
yeah,
Um,
like in an ideal world there was no pandemic and we figured these things out maybe over a longer period of time. But if you can go into something that awful, and it was awful, and still find some aspect of good in it, I think that's what's going to keep you sane. I think that's what kept a lot of people sane, just finding that one stroke of positivity throughout.
yeah. Um, so just on your book then, I just wanted to ask about the kind of be interested in the hearing what the process of writing it was like, in terms of
Mhm.
what were the things that kind of some of the things maybe you experienced that you used as content, I suppose, for the book.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, a big part of the book, and it was always going to be when I was writing about mental health, is I talk a lot about how I reacted to my best friend taking his own life 10 years ago when he was 18, I was 17. So that's a big part of the book, and it's about the grief of that, and then that grief kind of morphing into this numbness and then into depression, and moving on from that depression and trying to figure stuff out, but not really ever dealing with stuff. Just kind of dealing with it well enough to function and live a relatively normal life, but not properly putting it to bed. And how that kind of that bled into different aspects of my life. So it kind of disrupted me forming functional relationships with partners, and just feeling lonely a lot of the time. But I think the revelation in the book for me was that so like I've always experienced a lot of loneliness in my life, and for my whole adult life I thought that loneliness was a result of my friend dying. But what I kind of realized as I wrote it is that I've always kind of been like predisposition to being alone, or loneliness, and like his death exasperated that issue, but it didn't like cause it. So I think, and I didn't really know that until I started writing the book, because as I said, it was quite therapeutic, and I learned a lot about myself in the process. And I realized that was the case, where like I was kind of like almost blaming his death on the reason I've been alone. But I was like, I've always kind of been like that, and it was just coming to terms with that and accepting that. And I think it's a book about like accepting the fact that there's flaws, like everyone has flaws, and it's accepting your own flaws and trying to like live with yourself despite the flaws is a big theme in the book.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. And then your blog as well, I think your blog is award nominated, isn't it?
Yeah, so the award, actually I think the voting ends on this Friday, but yeah, it got nominated for 2 awards with the Mental Health Blog Award, which is great. Like, I mean, I've never done the blog for that type of thing where it's like for awards or for I just want to help people with it, but it's nice to be recognized as well at the same time. So I was really happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously shows, how good it is, how impressive it is. And then you write poetry as well, don't you?
Yeah, I kind of just do a bit of everything. Yeah, like poetry, it's mad because like I have like, because I know a lot of people in the writing community. I know some fantastic poets in Ireland and in the UK, and like poetry for me was always kind of something I did as a break from like my real writing, for like, I suppose, because I was always more of a short fiction writer, and then the poetry just be like, oh, this is kind of a thought I've been having. And then yeah, I wasn't really like looking to get them published, but then some of my friends encouraged me to maybe get them published. And over the years we had things here and there in different literary magazines. But yeah, now there's, so the first chapbook of mine, which is like not a full collection but just like a small book of poems, came out in February, and I have another one coming out in July with Dark 30 Poetry. So yeah, it's just been kind of, it's one of these things that I always like doing, but I never really took too seriously. And it just, things came together, and I was lucky enough to have people in my corner who were quite encouraging. And yeah, so the poetry is going well as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, to have that as a lad. I think because I remember in school, and I've kind of touched on this a bit before, that I always enjoyed English. I think English is probably my strongest subject, and I've always kind of experimented, I suppose is the word, with writing a little bit, even just for myself a lot of the time, or shown things to 1 or 2 people, like kind of short fiction or stuff like that. But I mean, when in school, especially, or even when you're talking about school and you're talking about like how good Shakespeare was, or like going on about Macbeth and stuff like that, while other lads are kind of going like, why are you interested in that? I mean, there must be a bit of that for you, like where people are kind of like poetry, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like because I went to an all boys school, so I know exactly what you're talking about when you come to like, you're talking about lads being like, why are you into that? And I mean, in school I wasn't really like, I was always good at English and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't really thinking of like writing my own stuff. I was just like, yeah, I'll do enough to like pass classes and all that. But it was only in my like early adulthood that I kind of got into writing poetry. And I think what helped me is that, and again, you've experienced this, where like the first time you put something out there, be it a blog or a short story, you're freaking out and there's so much anxiety and stress. But like, I've been putting the blog out for 7 years, so by the time putting poetry out into the world came around, there was still a sense of hesitancy and anxiety, but it was nowhere near the level it was when I put out my first blog, because like I'd been used to putting stuff out there and either people liking it or people giving me shit for it. It wasn't anything new. So and what I kind of learned early on, and I think this was really important, is that like there are always going to be people who, no matter what you do, aren't going to like it. Like they're just going to, either talk shit or, tell you they don't like what you're doing, no matter what you do. And I think what I realized early on was that they rarely say that stuff to your face. Like they say it behind your back, or they say it in group chats you're not in. So I was like, that's fine. If people aren't going to like it, because even if I like was putting out just like that I like the color blue, people are going to get angry at me because I don't like the color red or something. Like, so it was the case of like, no matter what happens, there's going to be someone not agreeing with it. So I was like, I'm just going to do what I feel is right for me. But there's still that aspect of like, and I suppose it's like the masculinity thing where it's like, there was a part of me is like, why are you writing poems? Like what's going on there, but it's just natural for me. It just makes sense. And a lot of my friends don't necessarily get poetry. Like they're really supportive, a lot of my lad friends, but they're like, they don't get it. Like they're like, I just don't understand the need for this. And I was like, yeah, that's fair enough. But at least they're not giving me grief for putting it out there.
Yeah, I suppose you can take the lack of understanding. I mean, not everybody's going to understand everything, all of what you do, No. You just want them to kind of maybe support it a bit, or even just, sometimes I say to people who are kind of a bit like that, maybe with the podcast or something, like I don't expect you to like it or understand it, whatever, but I mean, maybe mention it to somebody who would,
Yeah.
You don't have to talk shit about it,
Yeah, like as in just the amount of things I like I have friends who like, they do podcasts or they have an art page or whatever, and I might not get it, but like it costs nothing for me to retweet it or reshare it. And I think that's probably just something that's been lacking in our kind of world, is this idea of encouragement. Like encouragement is free to give, and it makes all the difference. Like it's the difference between someone chasing down a dream or trying to get a book published or trying to put out a podcast. Like encouragement is the difference, because if your friends or your family are just like, what are you doing, don't do that, then you're going to be like, all right, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. And like what you said there about sort of learning early with your blog, I mean, it was kind of the same for me with the podcast. It was just like no one's gonna give me this magic thing where like it just happens or everyone loves it, or no one's gonna kind of not nobody's gonna encourage me, but nobody's gonna sort of stand over me and make sure I do it or anything like that, so it's kind of just I was doing it for myself, really. So it was like, just stop standing in my own way and just do it, which also kind of tied into like I'll do it, I will do it soon, I'll definitely do it soon, and then I realized I've been saying that for the last couple of months now, just bite the bullet and do it, which like like you said there about the fear of putting stuff out there, like it definitely is scary, but I think once you put your first sort of piece of content or whatever out there and the world doesn't end, it's kind of like, okay, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah, like not everyone is, generally people aren't really thinking about what you're doing anyway. Like, they're like, oh, he did that, cool, and then they stop thinking about it. And I think like that kind of fear, that anxiety, like for me has almost been a compass, because like, be it like doing podcasts or putting stuff out there or going public speaking, like I'm always anxious about these things, but I'm like, the anxiety is pointing in the direction that you should be moving, because after you finish the thing, like after you've put it out there and you get feedback or you've done your public speaking, you always feel way better. You're like, oh, I'm glad I did that, delighted I did that. So it's just I used to like resist it and be like, oh no, anxiety is telling me not to do it, but now I'm like, okay, I'm anxious, so I should do that.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, because then that's where you kind of grow, isn't it, and move forward and stuff. You could stay in your comfort zone, but you don't really learn anything from that or grow as a person, or you end up looking back then going, I should have done this and this.
Exactly, exactly, that's it.
And like I talked in the last episode, I did a solo episode, talking about talking a little bit about the word should, and I was like, it's like I was like, it's the worst word like that we in the language, like it doesn't benefit us in any way, it's horrible it's kind of a horrible feeling to look back. I wish I did this, I should have done that when I had the chance, or when I had the motivation, or when I was younger, or whatever it is, And I said before as well about the podcast, I would rather be in a position where, say, I tried it and for whatever reason it didn't work out and I packed it in after 2-3 episodes, than sit there safely and go, well, it's better to just not do it. You know, that way.
Yeah, because I think there's that aspect. Like if you live in that and like you don't do it, then there's always in your mind like, well, at least like it could have been huge. Like, it mightn't have failed because you've never done it, or you're living without the risk. And I think the risk is the game changer, because like no matter what happens after you decide to do something, you can always like look back and be like, I tried. At least I tried. Like, because a lot of people are afraid to even try, and that's where you kind of start to live in the comfort zone, or you settle and you're just like, at least like like everyone fails, so failure shouldn't be the thing you're afraid of. Like, I think the thing you should be afraid of is that you didn't even attempt it because you were afraid of that.
Yeah. It's kind of like what one of my favorite sort of quotes or mantras or whatever in the whole kind of world of self-development is that you either win or you learn. There's a failure. There is a kind of naturally a fear around failure till you learn to sort of embrace it. And then because you always learn something from it. Once you realize that, then you look at failures or whatever. You look at things that went wrong, and you go, actually, I learned a bit about myself there, or and then you can just kind of.
Sorry, and there's also that aspect of like people think whatever, or even before for me, like I would have thought like failure is this very rare thing, but like literally everyone on earth fails. Like even like people who are like super successful like fail all the time. Like failure is just the thing that it's just part of it. Like,
yeah, because sometimes there can be a narrative then with like really successful people, like who start huge companies or invent things or something like that. Like those people started off inventing things or making apps or whatever it was, that absolutely, there was tumbleweeds, like, or they were terrible, or and then on the 4th, 5th, 6th attempts they got it right. So there can be a narrative with people that, oh, that person's really successful and I'll never get to that, but you kind of go, well, they started off where you are now.
Yeah, like there's that. I can't remember who said this, but it's like overnight success takes years of failure first. Like it's like you get, as soon as you get successful, then that's it. Like, and everyone's gonna be like, oh, he's successful, but like the amount of time that was put into like absolutely battling it beforehand is not seen, because no one knows you when you're not succeeding. Like so like they're obviously not going to know you when you're in that section of just failing over and over again until you get it right.
Yeah. So when you were doing your blog then, or kind of starting out writing and stuff like that, how did you kind of motivate yourself to keep going?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it when you were saying why you started the podcast. Like for me, I was doing it for myself. It was almost just like an online journal in a lot of ways. It was just whatever I was thinking about that week. And that's kind of still what it is. It's more niche down and more focused now. But I remember when I started the blog, it wasn't solely mental health. Like it was everything. Like it was short stories, it was mental health, it was like social commentary, it was all over the place. And I was fine with it, because I was like, oh, this is just, I enjoy writing and this gives me an opportunity to write every week and people can read it. And that was fine. And then it stagnated after a while, because I was like, what even, like, because it didn't have any identity. Like it was just like, what is this like? So I was like, I need to like make it a more structured thing. And then I think once I put that structure on it, it put more like not pressure, but like it gave more of a format where I was like, okay, I'm taking this on as a legit project, so I need to be responsible about it and be like realistic about how much I'm going to post, because it used to be maybe like once or twice a week, and now it's once a week if there's something relevant to talk about. But I won't post if there's nothing to talk about. Like I won't just post for the sake of it, but I mean, the landscape of blogs is so different now. Like people rarely read stuff, so it's kind of morphed into more like TikTok and videos and reels and stuff on Instagram, which again I was reluctant to do, because I wouldn't have been my like ideal source of trying to get content out there. But that was just a resistance to change, and after you get used to it, you're like, this is actually easier than sitting down and writing at a computer. I can just talk to my phone, so it was a bit easier.
Yeah, that's true. And it's kind of you sort of have to roll with the times a little bit as well when you're trying to put content out there and do things like that. And even no matter how uncomfortable it is, um, makes you feel a bit older than what you actually are when you're going like, oh, these young ones with TikTok, but you kind of have to
Yeah, yeah.
embrace it, and
Yeah,
roll
100%.
with it.
Because I mean, like people will barely watch a 7-second video on TikTok. So I was like, they're
Yeah,
not going to read 500-word article here unless it's like something that's really meaningful. So
yeah. Um, and yeah, it's interesting when you talk about like the format of your blog and stuff, because one of the things that I sort of thought with the podcast was like that that it has to be perfect, or like what if something I say in episode 10 doesn't match up with something I said in episode 1? These were some of the things I was thinking, and I was like, somebody's going to catch that out. Like people are going to forget like what completely what
yeah,
was said, like so that was kind of a fear that was like, no, that's nonsense, get rid of that, because some of the stuff I said earlier about what it was going to be like hasn't turned out. But then there's stuff that's come up where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was going to come up, but in a good way, so
yeah,
um you can put an awful lot of pressure on yourself, I think, that it has to be perfect, or
100%.
but if you just kind of let it flow, it brings out
Yeah, and I
kind
think
of.
like because I think the pressure we put on ourselves comes from this idea that everyone else is like watching and waiting for us to fuck up, and like
Yeah.
I mean, like I noticed my blog was kind of all over the place and there was no structure, but no one else did, like, and no one else
Mm,
cared either. They were just like, yeah, we still read it, whatever, it doesn't matter.
mm,
So like that is a complete self pressure, and it's often imagined, like it's because especially at the start of something, like you should kind of not know what it is from the get go, because otherwise it's going to be way too limited and rigid from like
mm.
the word go. So I think that teething period of figuring out what you are and what you're trying to do is important, and it's often quite fun as well, because you're like, because there's no limitations on what this could be, I can do whatever I want, and then I'll find the niche that I like and I'll just go down that road, and that's kind of how you find it, I think.
Yeah. um so when you were writing then, did you how much of a struggle was like things like writer's block, or sort of like, I mean, was there a temptation to sort of, you touched on it a bit, talking about the structure of it, or kind of will people like it or not? Was there a temptation to kind of go like, you know I'm a bit of an imposter, or like, what am I doing, and just pack it in? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like I mean, it's been so long now. I do. I mean, everyone gets writer's block at some point, and there was times because I used to be like, okay, once a week has to be once a week, and then there'd be some weeks I'm like, especially because I made the insane decision early on to post every Sunday, which means a lot of Sundays I was hungover when I needed to sit down and write, and it was just a mess. So like there'd be some Sundays where you'd skip it, and I guess like there was a time where I'd really like be hard on myself for not putting out the blog, but I was also like, this is just a personal project, and no one else is really expecting you to be putting in this much output. So it was just kind of like being compassionate with myself and understanding that I couldn't do it the whole time. As for imposter syndrome, again, it's kind of synonymous with writing. I think as a writer, like every writer I know has a bit of imposter syndrome. Um, and it's just, yeah, it comes with the territory. But I think as I've gone on in my career and I've gotten published more by external kind of different magazines and publishers, that kind of gives you a sense of validity. And it's not that like, because I'd always be against like looking for external validation for yourself, but when it comes to writing, I think you need a certain amount of it to not just to prove it to yourself, but like to encourage you to continue writing. It's nice to know that like respected literary magazines or even authors have acknowledged that you can write, and I think that really helps. But it's not like the be all and end all, and there's still times even though I have books out and I have a book coming out, there are some days where I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? There's always doubt. Like, we're human at the end of the day. There's low self-esteem days, there's low self-confidence days, and I think the important thing is just to remember those days pass, and you'll come back
Mm.
to a better understanding and a better mindset another day.
Yeah, definitely, because it's easy to get sucked into that, and kind of um And again, that's something I've touched on before, is to let, say, a bad day turn into a bad week, a bad week turn into a bad month,
Yeah, like I actually have a tattoo on my arm here and it says "bad day, not a bad life," and it's literally that idea where it's like, just because you're having a shit day today does not mean that it's going to continue into tomorrow, or even in the next hour it might change. So it's just that, constant reminder that like this is going to pass and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good tattoo to have. It's a good reminder to have.
Good reminder, yeah, exactly.
You mentioned a lust for life there earlier on, and so I was going to ask about your actually, what is a lust for life actually for people maybe that don't know about it?
Yeah, so Lust for Life, a mental health charity that primarily focuses on young people in Ireland, and I suppose the main goal of a Lust for Life is to improve resilience and emotional literacy and well-being in like school-going children. So they have or I keep saying they because I'm only new in the role. We have a program where we give teachers the knowledge base and training to teach their students about resilience and emotional well-being and how to be mindful and how to understand why and how they're feeling certain emotions and how to deal with it. And I think so the main goal is to allow young people to like be guardians of their own mental health and not have to depend too much on external stuff, because unfortunately we live in a country that doesn't have very good mental health services. So it's doing as much as we can to help young people to take care of their mental health to the degree that they can.
Yeah. And then, so you mentioned that you're new in the role. What's your specific role within that then?
So basically I kind of anything that goes like public from a Lust for Life comes through me. So it kind of married my because it's basically what I'm doing, what I have been doing for Thoughts Too Big for the last 7 years is essentially what I'm now doing for Lust for Life. So kind of all their social medias, anything that goes public just comes through me. And we've different programs coming up and it's communicating those programs to people so they can get involved and setting up different interviews and podcasts and live takeovers. So just all the public facing stuff is the stuff I do, which is great because I guess it's funny, like, because I haven't been trained in that, like, with in terms of a traditional education, but I guess my CV at this point for this role is Thoughts Too Big, which again like speaks to what I was talking about earlier of just doing what you love doing regardless of whether it's successful from the get-go or whether you're being paid for it, because like the stuff I'm doing for Thoughts Too Big is the reason I have a job with a mental health charity now, and it's a job of all like a role that suits me perfectly and it's what I want to be doing. And that came from just me being interested enough to do something I'm passionate about for free just because I love doing it.
Yeah, and maybe that's where sometimes the lack of understanding we were talking about earlier comes from, because there's always kind of things of, me doing a podcast or you doing your blog or whatever it is. There's always maybe question marks of other people who would, I suppose, maybe seek to instantly monetize something like that, which there's nothing wrong with that. But some people might look at it as someone doing it as a passion for free or whatever and kind of go, that's a lot of time to be putting into something that you're not getting monetary reward for. Some people might have that viewpoint, whereas as you say, like it's about and I mean now you've kind of got your reward for that with your new role, so it's kind of, you end up getting that reward in the long term, but I suppose you have to do it for the right reasons, really, the passion and the kind of the real interest in it.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of nailed it there. I mean, I think like especially when it comes to mental health, like if you're doing anything with mental health with the primary goal of being paid for it, like you're not really doing it for the best reasons. And I know, like, I mean, and I kind of understand why people might like give you not very charitable views, because people are, especially in Ireland, can be, not everyone, so like a lot of people I know are very, very supportive, but some people can be quite pessimistic or begrudge anyone who's trying to do something outside of the kind of prescribed way of living. So instead of like doing the traditional route through your career, like mine's been up and down and left and right and writing, and it's very not like I suppose, the regular route, and people can be quite begrudging at that because you're like, there's a lot of like, who does he think he is, and what does he try, and that can be hurtful. But at the end of the day, it's not about you; it's about them dealing with an insecurity, or maybe a resentment they have for themselves for not chasing down their own dream or their own passion, and that their way to deal with that is to take it out on the people who are chasing their dreams. And that's it's tough, but I understand why it happens, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's something I think about a lot, or talk to people about a lot. A bit like you. I mean, my I suppose path has definitely not been like linear, straightforward. It's been up and down all over the shop. So there's also a kind of a question of, as well as like, oh, he's going outside the norm, he's doing something different, or there's also kind of a thing of like, when are you going to settle? The real kind of Irish thing, like, when are you going to,
Yeah.
what are you actually doing, like, or but I mean, obviously the world's different to how it was 20, 30 years ago, where you got a job, got a pension, got a house, and that was you done.
Yeah.
Well, that's putting it very simply, but you know what I mean.
No, yeah, I know what you're saying though. It's like it's a lot easier to do a very different route now because there's so much options. Like, I mean, you can get rich off crypto tomorrow if you want to, like, so there's no wrong answers, like.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I mean, Paul Flaherty was asking me, actually, when I was on his show, he was asking me, he mentioned like influencers and stuff like that now. And I kind of said like, oh, a lot of people would take the piss out of that and stuff, but like, there should be that encouragement for people to kind of do what they want, or to explore those kind of things. It could be a phase. They might not be interested in it this time next year, but it's trial and error with that kind of stuff. You kind of have to, they could, people doing, trying things and being vulnerable and stuff like that could stumble upon something and go, actually, I could do so. I could really make something out of this. Or, well, no, I tried it. It wasn't for me, but it's like earlier when we said, if you stay in your comfort zone, you won't know that. You won't find those answers,
Yeah. And I think like I can only really relate it to writing, but I think the times in my writing career that have been the most, like, say, positive is when I've been very honest, very raw, and not trying to like cover up the flaws or the blemishes of like a personality. And I think you can kind of equate that to like how life works. It's like when you're honest, when you come with good intentions, and when you're trying to do the right thing, no matter what you're doing, I think things generally work out. Like, the universe kind of rewards you for being well-intended and honest, because no matter what happens, like, I know people in podcasters and stuff who like are disingenuous, and they buy followers, and they successful when they're not, and like, people like that they're not honest, and they don't have the right intentions, and they're doing stuff for the wrong reasons, and like, those people get caught out. At the end of the day, like, the universe correct for that. And well, like, that's what I like to think. That's the optimist in me, but I like to think that if you're on the right side of things, eventually things will click into place.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It makes me think of the book Manifest. I don't know if you've ever read it, Roxy Nafusi.
I read like extracts of it, but I haven't read the whole thing.
Yeah, I finished it not so long ago, earlier this year, and it's very good. But it makes me think of that. I mean, to be fair, that's something even not that long ago, talking about like the universe or what the universe gives you or stuff like that. I would have said that's absolute nonsense. Like, it's
no, I'm the same.
But you do kind of open your mind a little bit when you read a book like that, and you go, okay, things are sort of happening in the background that you don't realize, or as you say, if you're well intentioned, doing things for the right reasons, or I mean, it was interesting when she was talking about, even kind of, sometimes the more you desperately want something, the more maybe you won't get it.
Yeah. It is that thing. Like, I mean, like, I don't really like, the airy fairiness of manifestation. I don't really buy into, but I do understand the idea of like, and we've all been there. This is a good example of it. Like, when you're younger and you were really into this like one girl or whatever, and the more you were into her, the more she was like repelled by it, because you're putting out this kind of energy, like, and that's like, you can see that in the process. Like, you can actually see it happening. You're like, so I think that stuff definitely happens across the board, where you're like, the more, like, I actually wrote a short story about this, about a young fella who couldn't get the ride for ages, and he was giving off what I called, they're not real, but desperation pheromones, where like they could just smell the desperation off him, and like that's essentially what we're talking about here. It's like, if you push too hard and like are trying too hard, I think it doesn't really work out. You kind of have to get into your groove and trust that things work out. It's, the whole trust the process kind of ethos of the 2020s. It's just, do your thing and the right things will come your way, I think.
Yeah. That it sounds like I've seen that short story happen in nightclubs in Maynooth in Dublin. Are you sure it's fiction?
No, it's probably based on definitely facts, but anyway.
But yeah, you were talking earlier about, the kind of education side of stuff with Lust for Life. Like even speaking about kind of earlier, like how perfect or whatever the format or something should be. This is how a lot of these conversations go. It's kind of like ask about something, move on to something else, come back to, but I think that's what can make it kind of interesting conversation. But but I was going to ask you a bit more about the education on that, because I was talking to Siobhan Murray in particular, who works with SOSAD. She does that, I suppose, similar kind of role to you, actually. She does a lot of her kind of PR stuff. And we were talking about how education really needs to be improved and kind of brought into the 21st century, really, around like mental health and stuff like that. So I suppose, what's your kind of view of mindfulness or mental health education? What's the kind of picture you have of it? Do you know what I mean?
Like, I think it obviously depends on the age group, because I remember a few years ago I was petitioning quite intensely to get mental health education into secondary schools, because I think at least in secondary school there's a level of maturity where you can talk about the more serious aspects of mental health, or mental ill health and mental illness, because I think it's probably not appropriate to teach young kids about that, but you can still teach young kids about emotional intelligence and understanding their emotions and resilience and that, and mindfulness, and that there's a lot of positive aspects of that, like research-based positive aspects of that for mental health. But I think, unfortunately, we're still at the point where, the work we're doing in the Lust for Life is publicly funded. It's free, but it's voluntary. So not every teacher is going to sign up for it. Whereas if it was within the school curriculum, which it isn't at the moment, but if it was, then it would be, mandatory, and you'd have to teach about mental health. So we're still a ways away from that happening, but we do have more of these types of programs, like the Lust for Life Schools program, and there's other ones out there that schools can sign up for. But as long as it's voluntary, you're not going to reach every child, and that's probably where the problem is.
Yeah, and it's when stuff is publicly funded, it's an issue. I think prioritization. I mean, obviously money doesn't grow on trees, but I think it can be better spent sometimes.
Yeah, and like I've only read an article there, I think it was in the Journal, where like charities are filling the gap that the government is failing to fill. So like, there's too long of waiting lists for different mental health services. So we're depending on, like, literally actually depending on charities to fill that gap and be like, okay, so you can't get therapy here, but you can go to PA House and get therapy there, but they're charities, so that's only going to last as long as they're getting funded by people who are donating, and that's not sustainable. Like, you need a government funded process, and it's just not up to scratch. So the government's just failing dramatically to deal with mental health properly, I think.
Yeah, and even I remember hearing someone's talk on the radio, I think a while ago, about the fact that there are quite a few charities, that in itself is a problem. Obviously, there wouldn't be the need for them, or the need for as many, if
exactly, like,
the government were dealing with it better.
Yeah, like, I mean, I always say this about, like, even Thoughts Too Big and stuff or whatever, but you do want to get to a point where all the charities and all the blogs become redundant, because they're being cared for through like publicly accessible government schemes, but we're just not there yet.
Yeah, I'm sure we will get there eventually. But
yeah. Eventually, I'll lose my job, and I'll be delighted, because that means mental health's in the right space.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like I was in a all lads school as well, same as you, and yeah, I mean, that's why I'm kind of always interested in asking people about this kind of stuff, about education and how it will change, because obviously I can only think about my own experience of secondary school. And I left secondary school in 2013. So, I mean, not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, but long ago in terms of mental health, I suppose, and stuff. And I mean, I just always remember things like, you know, like SPHE, bit of a piss take of a class.
Absolutely.
And but like, I mean, a young female teacher trying to teach a group of 30 lads, fucking SPHE, like, you know, sex in the body and stuff like that, you know, lads laughing, you know, like 30 seconds into the class, like I always felt bad for her and stuff, like, you know, or lads just like taking the piss with everything, and, you know,
so just anything that made you vulnerable in school, there would be a certain amount of lads who like, this is stupid or whatever, you know. So
yeah, like real opportunists, like any chance to take the piss, or, you know, it's kind of like again with the you know, writing for you, or English or whatever it is. I mean, I'd be so afraid to talk about the fact that English was good, or the fact that, like, oh yeah, we're doing Macbeth, like this is gonna be class, you know, because you'd get, you know, the lads would have no mercy, you know. So you'd kind of be sitting there going, oh yeah, you know, this is shit, you know, while in your head you're going, yes. You know.
No, I've been there.
And then that's where I think it's interesting, where there's been conversations about kind of getting rid of that, only having mixed schools. I think that might be a benefit, maybe, to lads and girls as well, you know, just for maturity as well, and just for, you know, experiencing different things, different conversations, you know.
Because I think when I was in it, I didn't really ever think about it, but looking back, like, it is such a strange idea to just like keep the sexes or genders like separated. It's just, it doesn't, like, because you just get polarized, like, as in, like, you just get very intense weird masculinity, and probably the same in terms of femininity in girls' schools, and it's just, it can't be healthy to be that unbalanced, like.
Yeah, and even yeah, as you say, when you look back, you see that stuff more clearly. Even looking back, like the uniform, I can understand the uniform, but then on the other hand, you are kind of going, it's also a little bit stupid, you know. But yeah, yeah, obviously supposed to be an educational experience, but sometimes you look back and go, you know, we could have learned more of this, less of this, you know. But I was going to ask you then as well about you know, like you're talking about your writing and kind of the loneliness and stuff, experienced dealing with it, say now, with that experience kind of gathered, I suppose, what are maybe some of the kind of positive habits that you've kind of developed to sort of help you along just day to day?
So like, as I said, I kind of have, and my dad is kind of this way as well, not to say that like we're alone and we're sad, but I have a predisposition to just kind of be like content on my own, as in I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'll be on my own for 4 days, I don't care. But like that kind of, if you do that for long enough, it can lead to loneliness, and then maybe not even understanding why you're lonely, even though you've chosen to be on your own for 4 days in a row. So I think it's kind of being aware of that and realizing that even if I'm not necessarily up for socializing, that it's a tonic, like, and it's good for you, and you get something from being around people. So I think a big thing for me, and I think the pandemic and the lockdowns helped this, because I wasn't able to be around people even when I wanted to be. If it was rare that I wanted to be around people, I couldn't be, and I understood the value in being around people and engaging socially. And I think that's been huge for me, like understanding that you do need to socialize a handful of times a week to keep the mental health in check. Other stuff for me that have always, like, as in, I often look back on when I was 19, 20, when I was kind of going through the worst of my depression, I was still playing basketball at quite a high level, and it was a big part of my life up until only quite recently. And I often wonder how much worse it would have been without sport and exercise. So I've always been very adamant about the importance of exercise for mental health, and how it can really, like, even if you're like struggling, there's very little chance it'll make you better, but it'll keep your head above water if you're exercising, because you do get a certain amount of boosts and endorphins and serotonin from that. So yeah, the two main ones would be understanding the importance of having people around, exercising, and then the other three things I kind of keep like in the mental health routine are like, stuff that we all do, we all have to do, but we kind of take for granted or we're sloppy with: getting enough sleep. Mental health kind of takes a hit if you're only running on like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. So I try and get at least 7 every night, and that really helps. Drinking enough water is obviously another one. But yeah, there's just these little like small things, but if you do them consistently, they really affect your mental health in a positive way. And you see the effect of that most when you don't do them, and your mental health is kind of shit, and you're like, oh, that's because I've only been getting 4 hours of sleep for the last week.
Yeah, it's almost a bit frustrating in a way that you only start to see it if you stop doing it. I've spoken about that before with meditation, where I don't really know what I was expecting doing meditation. I don't know I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but I kind of almost, I suppose, gave it up for a little bit. Because I thought, I don't know how much this is serving me, or I don't know if it's benefited me too much. And then I stopped, and like I was like noticed the difference straight away.
Right.
Like I was just less calm, or like I was just got a bit pissed off easier, or
right, okay,
whatever. So then it was like, okay, right,
yeah, that's
actually,
what it's doing for me.
yeah,
Okay.
so it's kind of it's not so much, it's not even so much what it's giving you, it's nearly what it's it's just keeping you at that level. It's stopping you
Yeah,
from kind
it's
of
it's
dropping
not
off.
giving you like happiness, but it's taking away the irritability or whatever. So that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I think journaling's the same.
Yeah.
I think though their habits, I think it's always important to um chat about, so people realize the importance of them. I mean, you kind of more or less do that with your blog. It's like another form of journaling. But sometimes if you just kind of write down stuff, write down thoughts, whatever, you see it more clearly then, when you kind of go like with a negative belief you have or something, it's like, oh, okay, that
Yeah,
actually
and
doesn't make sense
that's
now.
the premise of cognitive behavioral therapy, is that, like, and I think I've always used this analogy where, like, when you have the thought in your head, it's just big rain cloud, and it seems like huge, but then when you write it down, it becomes this little kind of paragraph of text, and you're like, it goes from being this unmanageable thing to this very manageable little paragraph. And I think that's the benefit of journaling in a nutshell. It's like, okay, I can now manage this, but I couldn't manage all of this above my head when it was a big swirling cloud of nonsense.
Yeah, because how would you kind of manage it or understand it when you've got that, plus I have to do my shopping, I have to go to work, I have to ring that person back, like you have those little things all the time as well that you have to remember to do on top of like doubts or whatever else is going on as well. I mean,
Yeah, and I
everyone's
think,
got,
like, if people are like reluctant to start journaling, I kind of like, if you think about, like, for me, and I know loads of people do this, where like if you have a lot going on, the way to get yourself less stress is just to make a to-do list, and then it's written down. You're like, okay, I can relax now. I don't have to remember all this stuff because it's written down. And that's essentially what journaling does for you as well. You're just making a to-do list of the thoughts in your head, and you're like, okay, now they're down. I don't have to keep thinking about them.
yeah, it's kind of like everyone sort of does like their shopping list or whatever, but then there's this kind of question mark with, say, journaling or your to-do list or whatever, like it's kind of like but you do your shopping list, you go into the shop because you'll forget something, or or these are the things I have to do, and then it makes it more manageable. It's the same as that. It's the same as, you can apply that to kind of any area.
Yeah, we seem to have this thing where, like, anything that's going to affect mental health is different, as in, because the benefit of writing the thing down, that it helps and it relieves the stress when it comes to your shopping list. So like, but we have this sort of block where like, but it won't do the same thing for my emotions. And it becomes the same thing as well when we think about physical and mental health. We're like, oh yeah, obviously I'll go to the doctor because my leg's broken. But as soon as it's like a mental health problem, it's like, I can't go to the doctor because it's mental health. We have these blocks where it's like, all the stuff works for all of the stuff. It's not that complicated.
Yeah. We just make it complicated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So might just start to wrap it up then. Don't want to take up too much of your time, but so the book I think you said is out in November, isn't it?
Yeah,
Lonely
November
Boy.
10th. So it's a Thursday. The launch will probably be in Cork, I imagine, but it'll be available everywhere. There'll be a pre-release and stuff, and that'll be, I won't shut up about that in my socials. I imagine once we get into November, I'll be like, hey. So yeah, November 10th, Lonely Boy. It's just, it's a book about dealing with death, relationships, just kind of figuring out your own shit by like just reflecting and being quite introspective. And like, I think the thing about it was the kind of big takeaway message from it for me was that doing that type of work is hard and it's painful. And there was a lot of stuff I realized about myself that I didn't like. But at the end of the day, it's been the difference between finding a way to be happy and just kind of existing and not really feeling anything. So the work's hard, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah. I think dealing with the topic of suicide as well is really important because I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have kind of experienced loss around that as well, so I think it's definitely important to kind of, I suppose, raise that issue and rather than bury it, now not everybody will deal with it in the way you dealt with it in terms of publicly and stuff, but to kind of, I suppose, raise it in that way is I think really important. It's kind of like with like we were saying about content, because like with your blog or my podcast or whatever, sometimes people don't even have to kind of actually let you know that they're reading it or listening to it. Sometimes you just know someone is listening to it or reading it and getting something out of it, and kind of that's kind of just nice to kind of think that someone is taking a bit of a lesson or something from it.
Yeah, and it is that trope, but it's a trope for a reason. Like, as long as it's helping at least one person, I think anything's worthwhile. Be it the podcast, the book, or whatever it is. I mean, once it's done, I think, like, I'm sure you've already had this with the podcast anyway, and it's always the really, really nice part of the job is that when a stranger reaches out and be like, hey, look, this conversation or what you said about this really helped, and keep doing what you're doing. I think, and that's all you really need, especially in the world of putting yourself out there. Just that little, as I said, like, it always comes back to it, that little bit of encouragement goes a long way, and people don't even really realize the power of it. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So just lastly then, and I'll put links and stuff in the show notes, but I suppose you'd be fairly active on like Twitter and Instagram and stuff, wouldn't you, if people want to find you?
Yeah, so the Twitter is just my name, at Daragh Fleming, and then the blog is at Thoughts Too Big, like the number 2. On Instagram, I don't have a Twitter for that because I could not take that on. So I'm kind of the Twitter for that, I suppose. But so it's just Instagram and Twitter mainly. The blog's also on TikTok under the same username if people wanted to do that too.
Yeah, you might reach a younger audience with TikTok as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
exactly.
No, fair play to you. It's brilliant stuff, everything that you're doing. So I hope long may it continue, and the best of luck with the awards coming up and the book in November and everything else.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Shane. It's been a good conversation, and just appreciate it.
Thanks a million.